Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Casual Criminalist. As always, I'm your host Simon. What we do here, well, we do true crime. John Billington, America's first murderer. Oh my, America's first murderer? This is going to be back in the day. When was America? When did America... I know all the Americans like, well, America officially became America in like, I don't know when. But there was 1776, is that right? Is that Independence Date? Something like that, isn't it? So this is going to be back in the day, I guess. David wrote this one. I've never read it. That's the shtick here. I got a script in front of me. I'm going to read it all. It's going to be, I want to say it's going to be fun. It's probably not, is it? It's about murder. Anyway, let's just get on with it. Thank you, David. Thank you as well to Jen, who does the music, does the visual effects on these videos afterwards. Makes it a reality. Yeah, this is also as a video. If you're listening to this as a podcast and you think, oh, I'd like to look at this, I'd like to see what's going on, I'd like some pictures, it also goes out on YouTube, doesn't it? And if you're watching on YouTube, hello. Let's go. Ladies and gentlemen, just a heads up, after Ed Gein, and especially after spending 6 hours researching and writing up the revolting contents of his house, I needed this next script to be a light one.
Poor baby, you're starting to lose it, aren't you?
Okay, David's last... I hope these publish in order, but I'm not sure. David last at least wrote for me Ed Gein, which was horrible. There were parts... It was the kind of first time with David's scripts that I had to skip over some details, because I'm always like, this is CSI, this ain't Saw... And David knows this, and he's like, yeah, these were the details, though. I don't know how to say it. And I'm just like, oh, God, it was so grim. I skipped over a bit. I need this script to be a light one. Deepest apologies to all the gore mongers in the audience, though I know still others appreciate the occasional breath of fresh air. Yes. Oh, my God. I don't know. This isn't a murder porn podcast. This isn't that true crime show. This is like... It's more, it's like I say, more CSI. It's like, let's get some people caught. Let's get these murderers in prison or gassed or some shit like that. Let's, I don't know, or hang them back in the day, right? Today's episode also comes with a direct personal connection. As a result of my sometimes dark and grim tone of writing, a few people in the comments have been speculating that I'm a serial killer in real life. Uh-oh. Can you imagine? It's like, that would be news. True crime podcast. One of the writers turns out to be an actual serial killer. Holy shit. Don't podcast your crimes. Okay. I mean, I would get a lot of views, which would be nice. It'd be good, you know. There's no such thing as bad publicity, even if one of your writers turns out to be a serial killer. But let's not hope for that, because serial killers are bad. I'm not sure whether this wants to make me laugh or cry. On the one hand, I'm extremely gratified that my true crime writing sometimes leaves people shaken and uneasy. It makes me feel like Matthew McConaughey's character from the first season of True Detective. On the other hand, I must stress that knowing how to effectively dismember and discreetly dispose of a corpse can come from research, rather than practical first-hand experience. And now that I think about it, I'm a bit worried what the Australian police might think of my recent Google search history. This video brought to you by Surfshark VPN. It's not, but it could be. It could, or maybe it is. I don't know. The advert's going later. It also doesn't help that I try to be precise about the methods of serial killers and sometimes try to unpack their psychology. But I can assure you, dear listeners, that this all comes from sheer dedication to the craft, not from background knowledge derived from my hobbies.
I don't believe you.
These hobbies are much more benign, mostly consisting of walking my dog, hiking, spending time at the beach, cooking, occasionally drinking to excess, and entirely separately exchanging shouting obscenities with people on Xbox. Yeah, no, this is the... no murder. These are nice hobbies. We have super similar hobbies, David. Hiking, I love. Hiking's one of those things that I've just got mad into as an adult. There's nothing better than just putting on my hiking boots and going for a big long hike in the forest. It's so peaceful. It's so quiet. I think since my life just became busy and I had kids, I'm just like, that time that you have just quiet in the forest, you're just like, mwah. And also, I mean, who doesn't love occasionally drinking to excess? And cooking and shouting at people on Xbox. There's not a single literal skeleton in my closet or under my porch or hidden in the Balango State Forest. Uh-oh. And yet, here I am, about to throw more fuel onto the fire by letting you in on a little secret. I am descended from America's first murderer.
I knew it.
Or rather, the first man to be executed for murder in the 13 colonies which preceded the United States. Make of that what you will. You can trace your genealogy back that far. That's impressive. I think I've told this story before. I got stuck in the 19th century. I traced my my father's side of the family are not from the UK. My mum's side are. And so I started with her surname, which I'm not going to share. Yeah, I've definitely told this story. I don't know if I've told it on this podcast, but it's like I was about to share their name, and then I'm like, wait, your mother's maiden name is literally the security answer that like banks make you give. But I managed to trace that name all the way back to like the 1850s, when that side of the family emigrated from Germany. And then I lost the trail because it became German. And I'm like, well, I didn't have the records on Ancestry for Germany. And that's as far as I got. Meet John Billington. My great-great-great-great-grandpappy, 12 times over, was born around 1580 in Elizabethan England, in the southern part of the county of Lincolnshire. Not much is known about Billington's early life because he undoubtedly came from the lower orders. He was born into an old-fashioned rural community where most people worked on farms and coalesced in small villages where written records were seldom kept of England's great unwashed masses. It's likely Billington worked as some aspect of agriculture, since he would later employ that knowledge while farming his land in the New World. Meanwhile, the Old World was about to enter the modern age. England was slowly ceasing to be largely a rural and peasant-based economy that it had been throughout the Middle Ages. England was transforming into a commercial and mercantile power. As such, like many farmers' sons whose ancestors had never strayed more than a few miles from home, John Billington headed all the way to London to earn his fortune. The fact he did so may imply that Billington did not have firmly established ties within the community of Lincolnshire, much less any property. He is also described in historical records as, quote, a very profane man. I like that there's still records of that. Yeah, he liked to swear. I think the future will record Simon as being a profane YouTuber. I mean, not that, like, there's people who swear like it's, you know, half the words they say. I love a good swear word. People are like, oh, Simon, clean it up. And I'm like, I don't know. It's like the not super smart person way of adding emphasis. Of course, if I was smarter, I could use all sorts of clever words. But then people will be like, oh, Simon, stop being so pretentious. So you just can't win. And I just find swear words, it's like, oh, right. It's like, you know, it just adds a little bit of, At least it does to me. I don't care. Which in historical context can be interpreted as John being irreligious, irreverent, mischievous, prone to carnal pleasures of the world, and has a big foul mouth. Perhaps many of his neighbours in southern Lincolnshire were glad to see the back of him. When John was in his early 20s, he met his wife Eleanor, who may have also come from Lincolnshire, though it's possible that she was a Londoner. We don't exactly have a lot of information about my dear beloved great-great-great etc. grandmama. She also gained something of a reputation for being quarrelsome, outspoken, and having feuds with other people. I'm super curious how you know this person is related to you. I'd really like to know. She also gained something of a reputation for being quarrelsome, outspoken, and having feuds with other people. John and Ella had two children, John Jr., born roughly in 1604, and Francis Billington, born in approximately 1606. In their younger years, at the very least, the Billington boys had a reputation for being juvenile delinquents. Well, like father, like son. For the next few years, to 1620, the Billington family lived in London and just barely avoided poverty and destitution. We don't exactly know what Billington did for a job in London, but it certainly didn't pay very well. Or it's possible that John was simply a spendthrift with his money, splashing out on an expensive place of residence along with wine, women, and song. That wouldn't be unusual for London. Either way, John accrued a massive amount of debt from various creditors in order to make ends meet, and in those days, failure to repay debt would see you landed in prison until you paid it off, which in retrospect is just a crazy thing. It's like, yeah, you're going to go to prison because you owe us all this money. And it's like, wait, I'm in prison, how am I going to make that money and pay you off? And they're like, oh, that's your problem, isn't it? Oh no, it's your problem as well. It's your money that I owe you. Either way, John accrued a massive amount of debt from various creditors in order to make ends meet, and in those days, failure to repay a debt could see you landed in prison until you paid it off, which is demented, because if you are in prison, you can't exactly work. Thank you, David. Agreed. I guess that's why we don't have debtors' prison anymore. It's a bit of an insane concept. As such, in a bid to escape his creditors and give his family a decent life, in 1620, John entered into a 7-year labor contract with a merchant investor for a new colony being set up in North America. The colony, 7 years? 7-year contract? I know these exist, because don't they, isn't that why, like, some TV shows end after 7 seasons, or used to, because the cast will get, like, a contract for 7 years, and then after that 7 years, it's like, yo, contract's up. You want to continue this successful show? I'm going to need to get paid a bit more. But 7 years is an awful long time to I haven't been doing YouTube 7 years. It feels I've been doing it forever.
That's nothing. Once I waited a whole year for September.
The colony was rather lamely and predictably called New England. It would be established just a few dozen miles north of the existing English colony of Virginia. The territory had warm weather and good lands for planting food and tobacco crops. New England would be run by a group of Puritans, religious radicals who rejected the Church of England and who formed a good chunk of the colonists. I mean, I know that life in the New World is going to be super hard, and I made that story about that colony. Was it in Virginia? Where it all went terribly wrong and there was like famine and cannibalism and all that crazy stuff. But if you're some like poor dude in London and then they're like, yeah, go to the New World, you'd be like, oh my God, this place is really big and there's tons of land. And the only thing we've got to put up with is these bloody Puritans. It's worth noting that John Billington was not a Puritan. He was a member of the Church of England, otherwise known as an Anglican. And given his rather outspoken nature, his irreligiosity, his reputation for being profane, and his frequent resentment of all forms of authority, it is likely he wasn't a very devout Anglican either. There is an old joke in England that Anglicanism isn't so much a religion as it is a social club where not even the priests and bishops really believe many of the things that they preach, or in other words, Anglicanism is, quote, the least Christian version of Christianity. And while the truth of that joke is mixed, since many Anglicans, particularly large numbers outside England, are quite devout, the fact that the membership of the Church of England was legally compulsory for all English subjects at the time meant that a lot of people just paid lip service in order to get by. John was undoubtedly one of those people. Yeah, I feel like isn't that most... At least I feel like in the UK, I feel like most people in the UK would say they're religious, and then it'd be like, do you go to church? No. Even on Christmas? No. Do you believe in God? I believe in something. Do you believe in the writings of the Bible? No. But are you religious? Yes. Okay. Doesn't sound like it though, does it? Unfortunately, Billington's own religious beliefs, or lack thereof, would place him on a collision course with his more zealous Bible-bashing compatriots. The Puritan faction in the expedition referred to people like John as, quote, the strangers, because they adhered to the ungodly Anglican Church. And John was also rather disreputable and troublesome, while the Puritans were exactly the opposite. In front of the upright and austere Puritans, Billington didn't stand a chance. It was as if Charlie Sheen had shown up for tea with Queen Victoria. It could not possibly end well, but it would be fun. It would definitely be fun. Meet the Puritans. Europe in the early 17th century was a tinderbox of factionalism and deep division between neighbors. All sides were gearing up for yet another religious war. People who generations earlier would have lived peacefully side by side began dehumanizing each other to an extreme degree, purely based on what they believed. Think of early 17th century European society being like what Twitter is today. Oh my God. Twitter is such a weird place. Like, it's definitely my outside of YouTube, of course, it's definitely my primary social network. But there are some crazy people on Twitter. Like, I'll get some it's not Instagram, because on Instagram, DMs are open. So, like, anyone can just DM you. And I don't go into my private messages. Like, maybe once a month I'll go in and see if anyone with check mark has messaged me, because that's like a good way to filter out the crazy people. Not that people with check marks aren't necessarily crazy, but I'll just go whip through and see if there's anything interesting. But on Twitter, there's just crazy people. People will say all sorts of and you'll be like, what's up? Okay. Except in Europe's fanatics were fighting, torturing, and killing each other over what kind of Christian they were, rather than whatever the hell it is political fanatics are fighting over nowadays. On the one side, you had the Catholics staunchly supporting the Pope and centuries of Vatican dogma believed to be handed down by God himself. On the other hand, you had the Protestants who objected to a large number of Vatican practices and edicts, who rejected the authority of the Pope. We don't really need to go into detail about the wars of religion. This isn't biographics, yeah, I have to say. I read that last paragraph about religion and Anglican and blah blah blah, and literally what I heard in my mind was
blah 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 blah. Like I know. No.
Hopefully it doesn't matter, because I didn't pay attention. And maybe you didn't either. England had gone Protestant in the previous century thanks to the family values of Henry VIII, and the Church of England was placed under the family values. 6 wives, mate. And the Church of... and he killed 2 of them. and was placed under the authority of the monarch rather than the Pope. This was Anglicanism, yet some more radical Protestants, aka the Puritans, felt that Anglicanism didn't go far enough. Many of the trappings of Catholicism remained: pompous bishops, huge cathedrals, graven images, exorbitant church spending and grandeur, and even the tying of pagan and Catholic traditions to Protestant religious holidays. Some of these radicals even felt England should ban the celebration of the overly Catholic holiday called Christmas, which they did briefly under the religious dictatorship of Oliver Cromwell. Yeah, I don't know, Catholicism's a weird one. There's so much pomp and circumstance around it, and so much, like, I don't know, there's a lot of dodgy stuff going on, because it's a super rich, super powerful, ancient institution. And it's like, yeah, no wonder all sort, and you know the stuff I'm talking about, that, I don't know, the Catholic Church ain't gonna sue. It's like, yo. There's a lot of touching kids going on, isn't there? Like, what's up with that? There's a lot of corruption. There's all sorts of dodgy stuff. Like, what is this? Why are we still finding... Why is this okay? Why is this still happening? Allegedly. When King James I came to the throne in 1603, he incompetently managed to piss off both the Catholics and the Puritans. On the one hand, the Catholic fanatic Guy Fawkes tried to burn him up along with all of Parliament. On the other hand, some Puritans began work to take over England, which they did briefly, under Cromwell and the English Republic from roughly 1649 to 1660. Yet some Puritans weren't willing to sit around for half a century in order to wait to worship God the way that they wanted. And so they set up various branches of the separatist church after 1605, flouting Anglican supremacy in England. Bear in mind that during this time, not attending Anglican Mass was a crime punishable by fines. It would cost you the equivalent of roughly $25 in today's money for every Church of England service that you missed. I'll be like, yeah, I'm not going. How often are these services? Like once a month? Okay, cool. It's like Netflix. I'll just see it as having to pay not to do this. For poorer people, that added up significantly over the year. Furthermore, if you were caught preaching or circulating ideas contrary to the authority of the Church of England, you could be imprisoned or executed for sedition. The head of the church was the monarch, after all. That's a lot of power, isn't it? In 1608, after the separatist church had been running for about 3 years, the Puritans got wind that the Crown had discovered their existence and was moving to arrest them for being illegal radicals. Approximately 400 Puritans abandoned most of their property and fled penniless to Leiden in South Holland, which practiced a modicum of religious tolerance towards different religious denominations. Already, the Dutch were nurturing a culture of tolerance and permissiveness. I just wish I could say, both then and now, that they weren't the least bit smug about it. I don't know, the Dutch particularly... I don't think Dutch people are very smug about this in particular. I've known a lot of Dutch people. They always strike me as extremely nice. I've almost overwhelmingly positive interactions with Dutch people. As a brief aside for local colour, the Dutch have a thing they call Dutch bluntness, where they openly speak their minds without regard for politeness or giving offence, which I also like. This is the opposite of Britishness, where it's like, we'll have to flower things up to such a degree just to not offend someone. Whereas just being blunt is sometimes I don't know, I like it. I'm never going to do it because I'm way too British. But it's just I admire that. However, during my own time living in the Netherlands... Oh, whoa! David has a much bigger experience than me of the Netherlands. Okay. I love how I just learn things about my writers' lives. I had just no idea. Apparently David had lived in the Netherlands. Okay.
We have no evidence that this is a serial killer.
I soon suspected that prefacing a statement with a warning of Dutch bluntness was often a get-out-of-jail-free card for them to be rude to foreigners. And judging by how many of them could dish rudeness out but not take it, I concluded that the whole thing was just a pretense and a sham. Human beings instinctively don't like excessive and insulting rudeness, no matter the culture. David. Sounds like David has a different experience of the Dutch than I do. And Dutch bluntness was on full display in the 17th century when local Leiden preachers and Calvinist church leaders began arguing publicly with the impoverished English interlopers. This gave rise to some religious instability, a deepening of radicalism, and even promoted fears that the Catholic Spanish would invade again in order to shut the whole thing down. The 400 English refugees also began to fear that in a few years their own brand of Puritanism would soon become assimilated and absorbed by Leiden's 30,000 other residents. The situation worsened in 1617 when the Dutch would ban church services by the English separatists in Holland, and so the Dutch culture of tolerance crumbled in the face of blunt political reality. Yeah, tolerance can only go so far until people are like, wait, this is going to interfere with this? No more tolerance! Okay. So were you really tolerant in the first place? It was at this point that the English Puritans resolved to go to the New World. two of the Puritans traveled to England to negotiate with a governing body which held all the deeds to land in America, simply called the London Company, because of course it was. Originally, they set their sights on settling the area in which is now New York. After a series of political machinations, the London Company granted the Puritans permission to settle a territory just north of the existing English colony in Virginia. One condition came attached. The Puritans' religion would not be officially recognized. Instead, James I was merely utilizing some radical Protestants to gain another foothold in North America. Nevertheless, the agreement allowed the Puritans to be able to be largely self-governing. They would not fall under the authority of the existing Virginia colony, and so the Puritans leapt at the opportunity to create their own brand of religious theocracy, where they'd largely be left alone by the crown. The Puritans finally struck an agreement with the London Company in 1620 after a religious war had broken out again. I just realized this is the true crime show, and we've just got a history of the Puritans going to the New World. And I have to say, like, other than a bit where it got a bit religiously complicated, I'm just totally absorbed in this story. I just totally forgot what this is about. I assume at some point someone's going to get murdered. Don't turn off. Don't turn off. There's going to be murder, I promise you.
Wait and see.
The Puritans finally struck an agreement with the London Company in 1620 after a religious war had broken out in Europe and the Netherlands was once again threatened with Spanish invasion. Many of the English Puritans did not have the money or time to depart Holland on the small ship the Speedwell to return to England in order to make the leap across the Atlantic. Only a few dozen English Puritans of the original 400 refugees crossed the English Channel. The Speedwell arrived in Southampton and rendezvoused with this one you've heard of, the Mayflower, which carried a further 65 passengers composed of additional Puritans and also non-puritanical colonists who were just hoping for a new life in North America. John Billington and his family were among them. The Mayflower and the Speedwell set sail. Oh, I didn't realize. I just know everyone in every American's like, you didn't know the Speedwell? I know the Mayflower. Set sail for the New World on August the 5th, 1620, but the Speedwell started leaking heavily, and so both ships were forced to dock at Plymouth in southwest England. The Puritans spread the rumor that the Speedwell's captain had deliberately sabotaged his own ship to avoid making the long voyage. The Mayflower was already full of passengers, and so 20 Puritans from the Speedwell were forced to go to London to find another way to the New World. Meanwhile, an overcrowded Mayflower, chock full of 102 passengers and roughly 30 crew, set sail on 16th of September, 1620, and made the perilous journey to America completely alone. Okay, maybe that's why we haven't heard of the Speedwell, or I haven't heard of it, because it didn't actually make it. From just half of those 102 passengers on the Mayflower are descended approximately 35 million people alive today. That is wild. You can check to see if you're one of them and apply to join the Mayflower Society, which operates around the world. I myself am member 43 of the Australian Mayflower Society, which is still fledgling due to the fact that Australian descendants made the leap to not one, but two British colonies over the past few centuries. My family has in fact made 3 such leaps. In that sense, I'm British Empire through and through, baby. Something to be proud of though, question mark? Or just ignore the fact that two of those colonies in my history are associated with criminal behavior. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, David's from Canada and he lives in Australia. If I'm not wrong, I'm pretty sure it's Canada. Now, just before we continue with today's video, let me tell you about our fantastic sponsor for today's episode, Skillshare. Look, it's a new year, and with a new year come new possibilities. I don't know what you've got plans for this year. I've got a lot of things I'm thinking about doing in 2022, and I'm sure you do too. And if you need new skills to pursue those things, well, you should definitely check out Skillshare. I've used it in the past. In fact, one of the most notable things that I did, that I learned to do on Skillshare was lighting, like how to light things properly. Especially at the beginning, I didn't really have any idea what I was doing, and I just looked up what sort of lights you need, and these were all like super basic, early getting started lights with a getting started course. I don't even remember what it was called on Skillshare, but I mean, there's tons of stuff on there, but I found an even better one that is now, it wasn't around when I was getting set up, but now it is around and it's more up to date, and it's made by Marques Brownlee, who does MKBHD. So big YouTuber, teaching people how to do YouTube stuff on Skillshare. His course is called YouTube Success, Script, Shoot, and Edit with MKBHD. There you go, Marques Brownlee. That's a great one to check out if you're thinking you'd like to maybe do that in 2022. What are some other recommendations they've got here? Indoor gardening. I have to say, I didn't even plan to talk on this, but I love houseplants. Like my apartment is filled with I like orchids and little yucca plants. And I've got a colony of banana plants because they keep growing. You have one and then another one grows. All this stuff's great. I will check that out, actually. Why not? My plants could look a little better. I just like having them around, but they could be better taken care of, to be honest. The ultimate self-care playbook: discover and nurture your centered self. That sounds honestly like something I do need. It's self-care, mental health. It's always I'll definitely take care of that. It's but I have so much work to do, which doesn't help at all. Should probably check that out myself. Look, prioritize your self-care and wellness by using Skillshare. It's a way to invest in yourself, unwind, and relax. Yeah, that's true. All the stuff I mentioned is kind of like learning to be productive, but you can also learn how to do tons of other stuff that's fun. I've got no interest in drawing, but I'm sure some people do. And there's lots of Skillshare classes about that. It's also ad-free, so you can stay in the zone while you're learning new skills. There's new premium classes every week, so always something new to discover. And the entire catalog has different subtitles now: Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. I didn't even know that. Honestly, not super useful for me, but I mean, I don't know who you are. Maybe that's great for you. Look, I've learned stuff on Skillshare in the past. It's like a learning buffet, if you will. That's not in the copy, but that's kind of how I see it. There's tons of stuff to learn, for fun, for skills, whatever. The first 1,000 people to use the link in the description below will get 1 month of Skillshare to try for free. Again, first 1,000 people, link below, a month of Skillshare for free. And now back to the video. The past was the worst. John Billington and his family boarded the cramped Mayflower, which set sail on September the 16th, 1620. Already luck was not in John's favour. September on the Atlantic Ocean was a dangerous place for sailing ships. Errant winds could blow a ship off course, and nevertheless, the month's delay caused by the speed whale made the journey at this time inevitable. Also, to be honest, the Mayflower was a pretty stupid choice of ship for the journey. It was usually employed as a cargo ship between England and southwest France, sailing along the European coastline. It was not an ocean liner. Yeah, ships that cross the Atlantic, real different from ships that just do potter around Europe. Real different. You take one of those little pottering around Europe ships and take that across the Atlantic. It's going to be an interesting time. The Billingtons were trapped with 98 passengers, living in a space below decks that had a ceiling 5 feet high. Oh my god. And yes, due to malnutrition, people were shorter on average back then, but not that short. And about 80 feet. It was about 80 feet long and 20 feet wide, or 25 meters long and 6 meters wide. That is a small ship for 130 people. 98 passengers, but then there were 30 crew, right? That's roughly 4 people for every meter along the length of the ship, and they were stuck there for 2 months. I can only imagine that made for a rather sneaky bit of hanky-panky between couples and a rather challenging... Use your imagination. Along the way, a man died in their space and a woman gave birth. I should never complain about British Airways or Delta Airlines ever again. You say this, but every time you're on, you're cramped in there, your knees are touching the thing. I'd say Ryanair, such a piece of shit, allegedly. And you're just crammed in there, and it's just remember those people on the Mayflower. And you're yeah, but I'm not used to this. I'm used to comfort. And then you're complaining again. I always complain. Who am I kidding, of course? Well, exactly. At least the Mayflower had the excuse of being the 17th century. You'd think 21st century would no longer pay thousands of dollars to be cooped up like sardines and receive rancid food for slop, or pay thousands of dollars more, sometimes tens of thousands more, for first-class luxury of fully reclining our chairs and not having to sleep upright like a herd of cattle. I mean, sort of. It's also you get what you pay for. Airlines, of course, could do away with economy and just do business class, but then they wouldn't make any money because most people don't want to pay an absolute fortune to have a reclining seat. You just be yeah, okay, it's cheaper. I'll just fly in economy and suck it up. And it's, of course, I know if I paid more, I could sit up front, but I didn't. Did I? And I'm just okay with that. Anyways, the human rights violations of modern airlines aside, back in 1620, the rotten September weather caused massive waves that bashed the Mayflower, loosening its timbers and causing water to seep inside. And so, the Billingtons got to spend the entire trip not only clustered together with a bunch of Puritans, but soggy and cold, even as they laid in their beds. This led to quite a few illnesses. Yet there, the colonists experienced a perverse bit of luck. Given the appalling conditions, it would have been quite reasonable to expect many more people to have died. Instead, all but one person survived the journey, which the Puritans aboard the Mayflower attributed to divine intervention. Because of course they did. The actual script says, because of course they did. And that was also my line. David and I Same page. John Billington, meanwhile, set about alienating quite a number of his fellow passengers with his curt and rather argumentative ways. One person in particular whose ire Billington drew was William Bradford, a prominent Puritan separatist who had spent time as an exile in Leiden. Intelligent, disciplined, and devout, Bradford was repulsed by Billington's prickly personality and rough edges, and given Bradford's standing in the Puritan community, this was an unwise enemy to make. Over the course of the journey, the Mayflower got blown wildly off course. On November the 19th, 1620, the colonists sighted land. They were looking at Cape Cod, which is today the state of Massachusetts. This is roughly 1,000 kilometers or approximately 620 miles to the north of their intended target of the coast of Virginia. The Mayflower tried in vain to sail along the coast, but unruly winter seas forced the small cargo ship back, and on November the 21st, they dropped anchor at Providencetown Harbor at Cape Cod. The colonists essentially said, "Yep, screw it," and decided to set up the colony of New England where they were. Billington found himself among the 41 passengers who signed the Mayflower Compact, a historic document in which Mayflower colonists declared self-government, an embryo of the United States independence, while at the same time maintaining symbolic obedience to King James back in England. I feel that's one of those things, it's like, yo, the old king's really far away. It's like, when you have a party and your parents are on holiday, it's like, what are they going to do about it? Nothing. On December the 15th, while the Mayflower was still at anchor and most of the passengers were still dwelling aboard, John Billington's son, Francis, then roughly 14 years old, fired a gun near a powder keg. John Billington's son was not a brilliant child. This threatened to set off a chain reaction, igniting all gunpowder aboard, effectively blowing up and sinking the ship, also getting rid of all that gunpowder, which is quite useful for stuff. The outrage at Francis's actions caused a scuffle between John Billington and several other passengers, which deepened attitudes against John and his family. They had barely begun their lives in the New World, and a large portion of the other colonists already deeply disliked them. Honestly, in John's case, it seems because he's deeply dislikable. Meanwhile, several expeditions onto the land began, led by Miles Standish, a hard-nosed and somewhat authoritarian English soldier. It's probable that John Billington joined in some of these expeditions. The weather was freezing and the ground was caked in snow. The plucky English were not used to such severe winter temperatures. The clothing they wore was inadequate. On their first night ashore, several of the men froze to death. Oh my god. Can you imagine? You make it all the way across the Atlantic. You've been on that Mayflower. It's been horrible. And you're like, we finally made it. Why is it so cold? It's so cold, we're dying! And due to the buildup of snow, it became fairly impossible for colonists to move very far inland. The second problem that the colonists encountered was that there was a shortage of food. The Mayflower had already depleted some of their supplies when the Speedwell had delayed them at Plymouth for a month before making the Atlantic crossing. The ground in New England was also too hard by December to do any planting. Most frustratingly, the colonists had not even brought any equipment with them that they could fish with, a source of food which probably would have saved them.
Now, we are
The third problem was illness struck the passengers and crew aboard the Mayflower. The winter weather caused many to die of pneumonia. Others contracted some sort of fatal coughing disease, most likely tuberculosis. And the lack of vitamin C endemic to ocean voyages caused still others to die of scurvy. As an aside, the practice of British sailors to supplement the vitamin C in their diets by adding lemon and lime juice to their allotted rum is why Americans sometimes to this day call the British by the derogatory nickname of limeys. There you go. Limeys. It doesn't seem particularly offensive. I never really like limeys. Okay, I guess. Love a bit of lime. Don't want to get that scurvy, do we? All told, of the 102 passengers who boarded the Mayflower, 49 men, women, and children died that winter. Oh my god, that is a death toll. The Puritans did not comment on whether, like most people surviving the Atlantic voyage, whether this downpour of death was also divine intervention. No, divine intervention only works when it's a good thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, Old Testament God.
More would have died, but thankfully the colonists found a large cache of food buried on the shore left by Native Americans, along with several graves. The next morning, the local Norse people arrived, angered that the English had dug up their supplies and disturbed their graves. The natives shot at the landing party with arrows. The English returned fire with guns and chased the Norse into the woods until the limeys lost sight of them. In just a few weeks, half the Mayflower passengers had died, and a number of historians over the years have mused that it was a shame that not a single one of the Billingtons were amongst the casualties. I've even heard one amateur historian go so far as using the phrase, "It was typical bad luck for the New England colony that my family back then was not wiped out of the human gene pool." Little did they know that the Billington dynasty was one day fated to repeatedly traumatize Simon of House Whistler with particularly dark and graphic episodes of the Casual Criminalist. Yes, thanks to David. The bad news Billingtons. In January 1621, Francis Billington, the same kid who nearly blew up the Mayflower, went ashore with an exploratory party. Not far inland from the Atlantic coast, Francis climbed up a tree and spotted what he called a Great Sea, which he thought might be the Pacific Ocean. In fact, the Pacific lay some 5,000 kilometers or 3,000 miles further to the west. What Francis has found was in fact a small... Oh my god, that's absolutely brilliant. He's not a brilliant lad, is he, in any way? But it's still this day referred to as Billington Sea, confusingly. And it also reminds us of what a dimwit Francis was. In 1621, John Billington was also brought up on charges of defying the orders of Miles Standish, the English soldier who was now leading the local militia. John apparently also made, quote, abusive speeches when Standish had tried to give him some orders. Essentially, John had told Standish to go f*** himself. John was brought up on charges, the first criminal proceedings in the New England colony. Is this the guy who's going to get murdered? Is John going to murder this guy who's giving him orders? Nevertheless, John displayed humility during his disciplinary hearing and escaped punishment, mostly thanks to the mercy displayed by the governor of the New English colony, the Puritan John Carver. It's so interesting. They got like this court system, they got all this. There's like 40-something of these people. It's like a small room filled with people. That's it. It's so crazy. 35 million people are these people's descendants. That's wild. Many of them from John Billington. But this incident left a sour taste in the mouth of other Puritan observers. In early April 1621, Governor Carver, who was working in the fields on a hot spring day when he complained of a severe pain in his head, most likely a brain aneurysm, he went home, laid in bed, and fell into a coma. He died on April the 5th. His replacement was none other than William Bradford, the influential Puritan, who had already developed a deep dislike for John Billington and his family. Okay, never mind. This is the guy who's going to get murdered. In June or July 1621, John Jr., Billington's eldest boy, wandered away from the settlement and got lost in the woods for 5 days. John Jr. walked around aimlessly, living off any roots, berries, and nuts that he could find. That sounds dangerous. Where are you getting food? I'm just eating random shit that I find in the forest. This is a whole new forest to you. This isn't some familiar-ass forest that you know. Just eating random nuts. Don't wild almonds, isn't that what cyanide comes from? You mad lad. Thereafter, he was captured by the Nauset people. Oh yeah, also those guys, they're around, they don't like you. A search party of 10 men, including 2 native interpreters, was dispatched to find him. This was done at great risk to their own lives, since much of the territory remained uncharted, and the Nausets were fairly hostile to the English ever since the exchanging of fire over the supplies and the graves. What a surprise. F***ing limeys. Before dawn one morning, the settlers were confronted by 100 Nauset warriors wielding bows and arrows and outnumbering the search party 10-1. Fortunately, the Nauset had John Jr. with them. He had been beheaded. He had been bedecked in a large quantity of beads and honored with the gift of a ceremonial knife. He was returned completely unharmed. Well, that's rather nice. In exchange, he gave them terrible European diseases. In 1622, 4 horses in the colony... What is wrong with me? I can't read today. That's not horses, that's houses. 4 houses in the colony burned to the ground. The cause of the inferno is unclear. It's also unclear whether the fire was an accident or deliberate arson. Nonetheless, many in the colony suspected John Billington of causing the fire on account of his reputation and growing animosity towards several people. Naturally, the other settlers had no evidence to substantiate this rumor, and no charges were ever brought against my grandpappy John. It sounds like they should have exiled John Billington, be like,
Yo, John, you're a dick. Go live in the forest, alright?
And to be like, I don't want to live in the forest. It was like,
Everyone doesn't like you, John.
We'll give you that ceremonial knife. Now get out of here.
Well, I'm not going to do that. Okay?
In 1624, John was again implicated in more criminal activity, but this time it was different. Although today we see the Mayflower Pilgrims as escaping religious persecution in England, which they undoubtedly were, they had not gone to North America to set up a pluralistic society akin to a modern secular democracy. They'd gone to New England to set up a puritanical society, a quasi-theocracy, if you will. And the Puritan Church of the Plymouth colony ruled the roost. 2 settlers, John Oldham and John Lyford, had written several letters that were critical of the puritanical church, which saw them banished from the colony. Why didn't they banish John? How hard can it be? Everyone doesn't like him. In North America in 1624, this was a potential death sentence. During their interrogation, the two men implicated John Billington, claiming he took part in many of their heretical meetings and supplied them with information about the colony. Billington denied all of these charges, though given what we know of Billington's character and his own religious affiliations, it seems likely that Billington had indeed grown tired of the austere moral governance of the Puritans, and would probably have had difficulty keeping his mouth shut. Although these activities were technically criminal according to the scruples of the Puritans, in reality, John Billington was likely just bristling at the lack of religious freedom in the colony in a way that no modern person could really fault him for. Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, you got to put up with the Puritans. They sound really annoying. Especially if you don't believe in any of the stuff that they believe in. You're like, dude, do we have to do all this? It's so stupid. It would be like someone forcing me to go to church now. I'd be like, you smoking crack? I'm not going. I don't want to go. I don't believe in that. Leave me alone. Why would I have to do this? The following year, in 1625, Billington allegedly continued his subversive activities, at least according to letters written by William Bradford. According to the governor, Billington was loudly and abusively outspoken against the Puritanical church, the local government, and even against the agents of the colony back in London. Billington even threatened to have one of the London agents arrested, though for what charge and how he would manage to do that from the other side of the Atlantic is unknown. Yeah, it's like the Atlantic today is big. I mean, it's the same size, obviously, but like, still, it's a big distance. And nowadays, you got phones and stuff. You could be like, yo, I don't know, office in, where are they? Virginia? Be like, yo, office in Virginia, I need you to do this. And then the manager of Virginia would be like, he's like, I changed my mind. He's like, what are you going to do? I'm going rogue. But back in the day, I'd be like, oh my God, what are these people in England really going to do about it? Dick all. Bradford, whose rule John had challenged, was now bitter in his dislike of my dear old grandpappy. Billington is a knave, Bradford wrote, and he will live and die a knave. This is the most old English thing ever. In 1626, the people of Plymouth Colony, Plymouth, Virginia? I don't know, wasn't this happening in Virginia? Oh, I don't know. Americans, I'm so sorry. I know this is a big part of your history. In 1626, the people of Plymouth Colony gained full ownership of the land from their investors back in London. The farmland was accordingly divided among the settlers. In this respect, John Billington got cheated by being given one of the smallest shares of all. Well, John maybe shouldn't have been such a dick, and people wouldn't have been like, who are we going to give the small share to? Well, obviously the dickhead John. Like, he's not in charge, and we get to decide how this land gets allocated. How much land's John going to get? How about none? No, we have to give him some. How about 1 square meter? That sounds good. He was given a modest house and 63 acres of land. That's a lot of land. To modern ears, this might still sound like a hell of a lot. But relative to the gains of his peers, this was a slap in the face. But nobody in the colony really gave a shit because the overwhelming majority of the people, particularly the Puritans, deeply disliked and distrusted John. In 1620, it's like, just don't be a dick and people won't screw you over quite so hard.
Can't help it.
Like, the more of a dick you are, the more they're going to screw you over. In 1627, Billington's eldest son, John Jr., died unmarried and childless. I wonder how he died. He's getting some Darwin Award, isn't he? This is the kid who saw a pond and was like, it's the biggest sea I've ever seen. A bit of an idiot. The future of my lineage rested entirely on his second son, Francis, who at that point was still unmarried and childless. I don't know if you ever considered this, Simon, but in the roughly 300,000 years that Homo sapiens have been around on Earth, an estimated 120 billion people have had to survive and reproduce in order to spawn any of us today. And an astounding number of people did not survive and never had kids. And when you encounter that an average male ejaculation contains, let's say, 250 million sperm, and only a tiny percentage of those ejaculations are made with the possibility of conceiving a child, the odds of any of us being born are downright astronomical. I have considered that before, and it's crazy. It's the odds of any of us being alive is just insane. Another thing that I think about all the time, not all the time, but like it enters my mind a lot now. It's like, now I can't go back in time anymore. Like, it sounds stupid, but if there was a time machine invented, right, and everyone's got stuff in the past that they'd like to go and change, like do things differently, even if it's like, yo, maybe you should bought more Amazon stock. How about Bitcoin when it was free? This kind of shit. But now I can't. Like, if someone was like, yeah, you can go back and buy some Bitcoin, I'm like, nope, can't do it, because I'd change something Or like, I mean like not being able to come back to the future. Go back to the past and then you can do everything again. You know, like say someone goes, you can go 10 years into the past and just buy Bitcoins or whatever. Now I can't do it because then like I can meet my wife and all that stuff, do all that again. Sure I can. That'll be fine. But your kids will be different. Right? That's the thing. They're going to be different because the chances of them being that are astronomically small. And it's that I don't want my kids to be different. I want them to be the same. Right? Think about it. And we are fast approaching the point where 2 more individuals were wiped out from the gene pool. Oh, only like 8 pages in and someone's going to get murdered in a true crime podcast. So far, it's like, we've learned about the Mayflower, haven't we? We've learned about Puritans, religion. Thank you for still being here. A murder in New England. John Newcomen had not arrived on the Mayflower in 1620. He was one of the many settlers who came aboard later ships as the English tried to inflate the population of the colony from 50-odd people who initially survived that first winter to several hundreds. It is possible Newcomen came over in 1630 along with the first major wave of immigrants from England. Not much is known about John Newcomen or his family. In fact, aside from the fact that he was murdered, we know next to nothing about the victim at all. We are not even sure if Newcomen was his surname or if it was simply a reference to the fact that he was a new arrival in the Plymouth colony. Oh, like Newcomen. Like, he's a newcomer. Names. Someone in my past must have been an amazing whistler. All we know was that Newcomen had arrived by 1630, the year he died, and although my ancestor is allegedly responsible for his slaying, I would like to take a moment of respect to mark this man's passing, and the literal thousands of descendants he otherwise might have had if his life had not been cut short. Because here at Casual Criminals, we respect the victims of crimes and the tragedies those people endured, even when our distant grandfathers were the perpetrators. I don't know if we have to feel sorry for people who were never born. Do we? I don't think so. By September of 1630, Billington and Newcomen already despised each other. Surprise, surprise! Allegedly, it's not clear what source of their bad blood was. Some historians have speculated that it has arisen from a disagreement over women or a night of drinking at a tavern which escalated into a fist fight between the 2 men. Other theories speculate that Billington and Newcomen disagreed over religion or politics, which gave Billington's outspoken and rebellious nature may be a possibility. Another theory goes that Billington had caught Newcomen stealing rabbits from his traps out in the woods. Finally, it is possible that Billington and Newcomen were engaged in some sort of illegal activity. One such theory points in the direction of livestock theft, and Billington needed to shut Newcomen up before he spilled the beans. All we know for certain is that in September 1630, John Billington allegedly hated Newcomen's guts and wanted him dead. Newcomen had headed out of Plymouth into the woods. John Billington was seen leaving town not long after, carrying a gun, or a blunderbuss, to be precise. That is the coolest name for a gun. According to one witness, Billington had claimed he was going out of town to hunt some deer. According to accounts of the trial, Billington cornered Newcomen, who hid behind some trees. But even with the blunderbuss, Billington turned out to be a fairly good shot, as are a lot of people in my illustrious ancestry. My grandfather used to be the coach of the Olympic skeet shooting team, and he used to practice his aim by throwing pennies up in the air and shooting them. Wow, okay, really? But I digress. In the second version of events, Billington fired on purpose. Billington hit Newcomen in the shoulder, and the man went down. Now, in the movies, a shoulder wound is what a scriptwriter gives the protagonist if they want him to be hurt, but don't want him to be crippled, or horrifically mutilated. And he'd usually show up in the next scene with his arm in a sling. Yeah, but this was back in the day. It's like, yo, that's getting infected and you're going to die horribly. And usually in the scene after that, the sling is gone and the protagonist's arm is somehow now fully recovered. In real life, however, this is total bullshit. The shoulder contains the subclavian artery, which if severed by a bullet will swiftly cause you to bleed out if you're not quickly treated. The shoulder also contains a bundle of nerves called the brachial plexus, which if damaged can paralyze your arm. And in the 17th century, that probably meant that the arm had to be amputated without anesthetic, during which you had a good chance of dying from shock or exsanguination. I made a video on my channel Into the Shadows about how it was done before anesthetics. That video was rated not suitable for advertisers and only available for people over the age of 18. You have to log in to YouTube to watch it. And I was like, yeah, fair play, YouTube. It was super intense. And naturally, in the 1600s, you had a high chance of getting an infection. Even with modern medicine, according to one study from a New Orleans hospital, there's a 10 to 25% chance that a gunshot wound to the shoulder can kill you if you're not immediately operated on. In one version of events, Newcomen's artery was pierced and he rapidly bled out. He was later found dead, lying in the woods where he originally fell. In another version of events, Newcomen actually made it to a doctor, but he later died of infection after the 17th century quack tried to operate on him. Either way, John Billington denied killing Newcomen. Nevertheless, a witness claimed he saw John Billington following the victim out of town. The gun allegedly used to kill Newcomen was claimed by Plymouth authorities to have belonged to Billington. However, John denied ever owning the gun. Thus, John's guilt rested entirely on hearsay, an unverified claim that he was the gun's owner, and speculation that John headed out of town to track down Newcomen when he could have gone anywhere in the woods heading in any direction other than Newcomen's. Today, the degree of reasonable doubt and lack of concrete evidence would have seen the charges thrown out. Yeah, for sure, but this is a really small town. It's back in the day, and don't forget, John's a dickhead. However, this was the 17th century, the same century as the Salem witch trials, and the frail evidence against the unruly Billington seemed more solid to the sanctimonious settlers of Plymouth. William Bradford said the evidence was, quote, plain and notorious, though his grudge against the Billingtons was well documented even in Bradford's own letters. Yeah, be like, I want a new judge. This judge seems biased. He'd be like, bad news. There are no other judges. There's literally hardly any people here. What do you think we're going to go? Go over to the next county? Doesn't work. The case was put to trial by jury, and there was little doubt of the outcome. The settlers, almost uniformly hostile to John after years of aggravation and his constant dissent, found him guilty and sentenced him to death. There was some argument, however, over whether the Plymouth colony even had the legal authority to sentence a man to death and carry out the king's justice. They were, after all, just a tiny early colony on the other side of the world from the king. In terms of legal precedence, they should have probably kept Billington in prison for a few months while they consulted with London. However, William Bradford managed to convince the newly appointed governor of Massachusetts, John Winthrop, that no such consultation was required. They had the legal authority. Additionally, it was important, as Bradford put it, to purge the land of blood. Holy shit. Are we talking some 17th century eugenics here, my dude? It's like, yeah, this is a bad dude. Let's kill him to get him out of the gene pool. Uh-oh. Which would somehow be bizarrely achieved by execution. At any rate, Bradford pointed out that the family was, quote, one of the profanest families in the colony. Well, might as well kill them all then. And they had been punished for misconduct before. Bradford went on to add that he had no idea how the Billingtons managed to bluff and con their way onto the Mayflower in the first place. None of this is even remotely relevant to the murder charge, but such was the logic of the vindictive William Bradford. Given the evidence was so flimsy, he needed to nail the legitimacy of his actions home somehow. In his view, a rotten egg who had caused a little bit of trouble in the past, who did not easily follow orders, and who did not subscribe to his particular brand of Christianity, was likely to have committed every single crime of which he was subsequently stood accused. Politically, Bradford had every motive for getting Billington out of the way, since the troublesome man had for 9 years represented a threat to Bradford's authority. Billington was put to death by hanging only a few days after his arrest and hasty trial. It is alleged that after John Billington's death, the rest of the family continued to be victimized by the local government. In 1636, Eleanor Billington was convicted of slandering local politician John Doane, and she was placed in the stocks and whipped, in addition to being given a fine. There's no record of what rumors Eleanor was spreading. She died in 1642, one of John Billington's granddaughters. Meanwhile, she was also placed in the stocks for fornication. Holy stocks, fornication.
The past was the worst.
Allegedly, she had sex with her husband before they'd gotten married and had one of her sons out of wedlock. Puritans were the best, weren't they? No. Francis Billington, meanwhile, the boy who nearly blew up the Mayflower, seems to have kept his nose relatively clean. He married in 1634 and had 9 children, a vigorous series of acts for which I am intensely grateful. Wait, didn't he die? I thought he died. Oh no, I'm sorry, it was the oldest son, not Francis. The oldest son died. He wasn't the idiot. The idiot survived. Oh no.
I see a giant sea.
What an idiot!
Dude, that's a pond. Again, reminds me of that brilliant spy movie where Jason Statham's character at the end is like, I'm going to take this boat. Going to sail it down to the south of France or whatever. And he's like, powers away on this boat, and you just hear him shouting, is this a fucking lake? Mwah. Exonerating John Billington. In the centuries following John's death, numerous members of the Billington brood have argued that John was either innocent of murder or else was wrongly convicted and sentenced in a miscarriage of justice. Part of this may be motivated by the Billington desire to clear the dynasty's name. We are decidedly more notorious than any of the other Mayflower families. There is very little doubt that the claims of Billington following Newcomen out of town are entirely hearsay. No one saw the shooting. When it came to tying the murder weapons of Billington, it was his word against an accusatory Puritan government. And even if the gun was his property, that does not necessarily mean it was Billington who pulled the trigger. Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, though, isn't there? And there's not so many people. So, I don't know. I probably reckon he did kill him. I mean, obviously, there's not enough evidence for him to be executed, of course. All of this leaves open significant reasonable doubt that they should not have secured a guilty verdict. One could also, by modern standards, have called a mistrial given that the jury was almost uniformly biased against him. Yes. Did they have a jury? I thought it was just a judge dude being like, yo, guilty. If this had happened a couple of centuries later, the trial would have been moved to a different town and placed in front of a jury who had no prior knowledge of Billington. As for fingerprints or testing for gunpowder on Billington's fingers or testing for DNA, you're about 350 years ahead of forensics. There's next to nothing tying Billington to the murder. We don't even know what Billington and Newcomen had quarrelled over previously, if they had in fact quarrelled at all, or assess the likelihood that the argument would have come to violence. Hell, we don't even really know who Newcomen was. What we do know is that Billington was not a Puritan, was not well liked, was prosecuted in 1621 for telling a militia leader to f*** off, and was not convicted of anything again, although the townsfolk did gossip that he was involved in other crimes, which included the act of criticizing the government and the church, which, aren't really crimes. Depends where you are and when you are, doesn't it? We also know that once the guilty verdict was reached, William Bradford went to great lengths to secure Billington's execution and to justify his death with irrelevant assaults on his family's character. History is often written by the victors, and in this case, it was William Bradford who wrote the history. With all that said, I would be less troubled than some members of the Billington family if Grandpappy John was indeed guilty of killing Newcomen. I do not find having a murder in the family such a horrific stain on our honor. I'm pretty sure with thousands of generations in every single family tree on Earth that every single one of us has a killer in our family history. Oh yeah, for sure. And probably more recently than you think. Hell, there are millions of descendants of Genghis Khan in the world. In fact, as a right of casual criminalist, I have to say that being related to the first man to be executed for murder in the 13 colonies is actually a bit of a badge of honor. There is one aspect of John Billington's death that does anger me, however. The man was obviously an opponent of theocracy and tried to use his free speech to denounce bad government. And regardless of whether he was guilty of killing Newcomen, the governing body of the day railroaded him and rushed him to the scaffold. In his own blustering and mischievous way, Billington stood for freedom of religion, free speech, and rebellion against unjust government in a way that keenly represents the founding principles of the United States of America. He was just a century ahead of his time. Yeah, this is one of those things where it's like, sure, he is, but I don't think he's doing it for any grand principle. He's just doing it because that's how he is. He's just a bit of a dick. And also, if you're in some tiny community, it's not like you're Edward Snowden standing up to the NSA. It's like you're just a dude in a group of 50 people who are all trying to get along in a horrible environment. I don't know, I don't think he's some sort of hero at all. He's probably just a murderer. Dismembered appendices. Number 1. Other descendants of John Billington include James Garfield, the 20th President of the United States, who was assassinated in 1881 after serving just a few months in office. Richard Gere, who was a Hollywood heartthrob until an unfortunate rumor circulated about a gerbil. John Lithgow, who was in Third Rock for the Sun, and in a massive coincidence, also played a serial killer in Dexter. I know that. Oh my god. Was he good in that show or what? The Wilson brothers, who founded the pop group The Beach Boys. Taylor Swift, who has a fantastic career writing songs that badmouth her ex-boyfriends. Taylor Swift is a legend. It's pop music. It's not necessarily for me. But Taylor Swift is very cool. The shit she gets up to. And Vanessa Hudgens, a singer and actress who got famous for being in High School Musical. I don't know who she is. Number 2, rest assured, dear listener, that despite a century of searching, no biologist or psychologist has ever discovered the existence of a criminal gene or some DNA passed down in family trees that makes some families more likely to become murderers than others. It would appear that the propensity to murder is something more universal to the entire human race. So no, the fact that I am descended from Don Billington is not proof that I'm a serial killer. However, that would make a lot. It's like, and also James Garfield, Taylor Swift. It doesn't work like that. However, if they did one day find the so-called criminal gene exists, I'm covered by the knowledge that I'll be under just as much suspicion as Taylor Swift. Hell, maybe she can even lend me her lawyer. I get the feeling Taylor Swift's lawyer is probably extremely expensive. Because Taylor Swift's extremely rich. Number 3, in case you were wondering, I'm not aware of any other murderers in my family tree, though I do not doubt some exist. I do know that on the Billington side, my ancestors hung around New York for a couple of centuries before heading off into the Wild West. One of my ancestors became one of the first sheriffs of a county in Montana, falling on the other side of the law. I myself briefly worked for the police. Another batch of my relatives were Scots and English who went to Canada as part of Britain's second wave to establish an empire after the War of American Independence. And then on yet another branch of my family tree, there are more immediately British, with one twig being wealthy landowners in Wiltshire and another twig, my grandfather, being in the RAF facing down Rommel in Egypt in World War II. Meanwhile, I'm just some git in Australia who definitely has never killed anyone and just writes books and scripts and buys suspicious amounts of rope and duct tape from hardware stores. I've said too much. Your knowledge of your family tree is impressive, David. I just got absolutely addicted. Ancestry DNA were a sponsor years ago, where I did one of those spit things and they tell me, this is your DNA makeup. But I also was so intrigued by it that I signed up to the other side of their service, which is where you can go through all the old records and stuff and link things together and connect your family trees to other people's family trees that they've made, like pieces of a jigsaw coming together. And I was addicted to this. I would just go into work and it'd be like, yeah, let's do a bit of work. And then I'm just going to spend 10 minutes and I'll find one new record. Let's do it. And then I had to cancel it because it was so compelling. One day when I get old and retired, I'll probably return to that and it'll be fun. It's super fascinating. And you're like, oh my God, these people who I never met, like my great-great-grandparents, here's their wedding certificate. And you're like, that's mental. It's so cool. I don't know. So I guess some people find this interesting, some don't. Anyway, this has been an episode of The Casual Criminalist. Barely. It's just like a history podcast, which I'd love to do at some point. I'd love to do a history podcast like this where I get to comment on it and go more in depth. That'd be fun. Let me know if that's something you want in the comments. If you enjoyed this episode, like it, subscribe. If you're watching, listening, God, what's wrong with my voice today? What's wrong with my speaking? If you're listening as a podcast, please do leave us a review. That is extremely helpful in getting the podcast in front of new people. And as always, thank you for watching or listening.